All right. How's that sound check, Mickey? I'm coming.
There it is. You got it.
All right. Well, in a season and a half of Technically Speaking, that's the first time my audio has failed me. So thank you for that, Mickey. So just to kind of kick things off here, my name is Brandon Burton with CoreLogic. I'm the Senior Principal of Industry Relations here and the Chair of the ANSI IICRC Standards. And I'm excited to bring you a topic today that's really kind of a special edition for Technically Speaking, where we're going to get into the lessons learned from catastrophic loss response. And super excited to bring with me a special presenter that we're going to have with us, a good friend of mine that I've worked with in industry for quite some time, not only inside of standards, but outside of standards quite a bit. I've learned a lot from this individual and super excited to share this platform with him today. You're going to hear more from Mickey today than you are from me. So with that, I want to hand things over, Mickey, if you want to say hello to the group here at Technically Speaking.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. And actually, I guess for a couple of you, it's still, or for several of you, it's probably still morning time. But hello, everyone. Hey, it's great to be with you today.
All right. Thank you very much, Mickey. You know, one of the things that I admire most in the conversations that you and I have had throughout the years about restoration and about the work that we do is just you have an innate ability to really focus on how important people are to the process. That's one of the things that's always amazed me about you, is that perspective. I tend to get really centered around the technical and kind of really wrap my mind around that. And I can't tell you how many times, Mickey, you've brought me back and said, you know, something to the effect of that people are that most important resource, and what about the people, or what about the impact on the people? So I'd love to have you just kind of start with something along those lines, if you don't mind, as we get into this topic.
You know, it's interesting, Brandon, when you mentioned that to me the other day about the people aspect. You're right. It's very close to me. I grew up in Southeast Texas, right on the border of Louisiana and Texas, 5 miles from the Gulf Coast. 1957, I was, 11 years old, something like that. You can date me. And my dad and mother had an insurance agency. So they sold insurance and sold it to a lot of family and a lot of friends in that area and everything. And in 1957, probably no one remembers this, but Hurricane Audrey, which was one of the most destructive hurricanes to have hit the Gulf Coast at that time, causing nearly 500 people to die in it.
Mm. Wow.
And my father had sold a lot of insurance to family and friends and people there. And there was a number of times that he had to go out and tell them this damage is not covered because it's rising water rather than falling water. And I remember watching my daddy cry. And so that's, you know, you and I, and Brandon, you and I are both really technical geeks, real nerds. And it's, you know, in most cases, it's easy for us to step back from the emotional side of it, because we're looking at how do we get this done? How do we get them back operating okay? And so, but we can never forget that these people, it's not only livelihood, because if it's their business, then it's their, you know, it's how they're going to be going forward and to try to recover. But if it's their possessions, their furniture, you know, we can get less emotional about clothes and furniture and things of that nature. But anyway, it was, you're right. I've never been able to get far from that. And I think every now and then of watching my dad cry over lost family.
And, you know, I think it's so important for us as an industry to try to step back and reflect on that a little more often than we do. I think those that have really made a career out of this industry have found a way to, either they've had personal experiences that really bring it home for them, or they find a way to empathize with that and just understand that the kind of the higher purpose of restoration is having an impact there, right, for people. You know, it's not because any of us have a love for crawling around in sewage in a crawl space. It's definitely not the reason we do it. So I think being able to really step back and appreciate that impact that we have is really important to give you that sense of purpose in what we do. So, but with that, let me kind of transition a little bit as we get into this. your experience in this industry really spans across, a very, what I would say is a very unique set of experiences that many of us have not had the opportunity to cross. And you've had the opportunity to take a look at this not only from just the practical, technical side of things, but also the business side of things, and really understanding what makes sense for a business, just kind of looking at the space and what doesn't. So let's kind of turn it over to the business side a little bit. And let me just ask you the question, is working in a CAT environment the right thing for every restoration business?
Boy, that is a great question, Brandon. In my CDS classes and all of my water damage classes and everything, I talk about catastrophe operations, because for my company, for the company I was with for a number of years, this was a big part of it. And so I would throw those pictures up there that we just had. I would throw those pictures up and I say, how many of you have ever come back from a catastrophe operation feeling like this? Oh my gracious, oh my God, why did I ever get into this? And so that is a good question. And I'd say, no, it's not for everybody. And so on the next slide there, this is what we oftentimes call a SWOT analysis, SWOT. And I've only done half of the SWOT analysis. So strength, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And so I think every company, before they go out, they need to do a SWOT analysis. So your strengths, your weaknesses, but what are the opportunities? Well, the opportunities out on catastrophe operations are great. I mean, you can have a really high volume of business. You can make some good profits. You can have it's a great team building experience. It's an intense training time, and it's a good opportunity for some, business expansion, either in new services, either with new people. So there's a lot of opportunities out there. And there are some threats. There's threat to your base business. So if you can't take care of your base business at home, that is a tremendous threat. It's a threat it's a disruption of personnel. It's also the personnel accommodations and the financial resource stress, the collection issue. So all of these are things that are stresses to the business. And so on this next slide, I have 5 questions that I'd like to ask. And so here's my critical questions to you. And what I caution people on in my classes, if you cannot answer yes, definitely, if you cannot answer yes to these 5 questions, I would strongly encourage you to think twice about going out on these large catastrophe operations. So the first question, do we have sufficient personnel and resources to handle our base businesses at home? And if your answer is, well, we would be awfully stretched, then I would say, think twice. Can your cash reserves, can your line of credit handle delayed payments? Because every one of these, you're going to have delayed payments, and they may be 90 days at best to all the way to 120 to even a year long getting paid on some of these projects. So if you can't answer yes to this as far as your cash reserves and line of credit, then I would think twice about going. Do we have an anchor job? So this was something that we learned early on in our CAT experience, is that we wanted to have an anchor job, one where we had already been invited out by an existing client to come and work. Because then if we had an anchor job, then that would basically support moving our resources out to those areas. The fourth one, does this type of event take advantage of our present competencies? Now, it's going to be a great training time for you. But if you don't have the competencies you need in order to be able to do this kind of work, then again, I would say don't go out. And then finally, after the operation, will we use the lessons learned to improve ourselves? Now, keep in mind that question I ask is, will you use those? There's no doubt that you're going to have some issues when you get out there. There's no doubt you're going to stub your toe. There's no doubt that you're going to, it's going to stretch your resources like everything. And what we always said is that CAT operations, they don't create problems for you. They reveal that you've already got problems, either in your services and your processes and your collection and your paperwork. So they're going to show up any of the warts that you have. So they don't create those issues. So the question is, will you use the lessons learned? Will you go back after you finish? Will you go back and kick yourself and be willing to be hard on yourself?
And be
you
honest.
can celebrate your success, but will you be willing to take those hard lessons, those painful lessons, and improve your services?
So let me double click on a couple of these real quick, if you don't mind, Mickey. So does this type of event take advantage of our present competencies? So expand on that just a bit, just unpack that one step further. What would you think? And I know it's probably varied depending upon event type, but if you could use just a couple of examples of event types and maybe expand on a couple of what you feel those core competencies are, or what they relate to.
Okay. Yeah, there's probably, well, there's a whole bunch of them, Brandon, but just a couple of them that I'll point out. If you have not had much experience with Category 3 water, so let's say you've done a few, but most of your work is in residential and most of your work has been on Category 1, Category 2 water. If you haven't had extensive experience with Category 3, then I would think twice about it. Don't go, because you don't want to go out there and then discover that every bit of this water is going to be contaminated because it's rising river water. Yeah. For some, something like that. Secondly, if you don't have experience with generators and using generated power versus a lot of small LGRs and small 110 volt single phase equipment. So if you don't have the competencies to be able to handle just those two things, diesel powered setups and generators, Category 3, and so those would be just two of them that I'm thinking about. If you don't have those competencies already, it's going to be difficult for you. You're going to stub your toe in those, especially those early days.
I remember that you had a piece several years back. I'm trying to remember what publication that was in, where you dug into some of these competencies pretty deeply. I can't remember what publication that was in. Do you recall? Was that a CNR article that you had written?
Okay, now what was the topic of it again?
Yeah, so when you dug into some of these competencies a bit deeper and just talked about some of what makes CAT loss response successful in terms of skill sets. I'll find that and I'll post that out with this.
Okay, all right, if you would. I don't exactly remember the that article, Brandon, right offhand.
So let's we'll queue up the next thing I wanted to dig into.
Okay.
So we're going to get into some of these lessons learned and some of your takeaways, but I think a good way to stand that up first is to dive a bit deeper into your history in the response side of this industry. So, and I know we've got a couple of slides we want to run through to run through that. So just let me know when you're ready to advance on this next set here. Okay. But go ahead and kick that off and just talk about your experience and where you've come from in the CAT response industry.
I have probably been involved, Brandon, either on site but the majority of these are ones that I've been on site with, but I've probably been involved in over 40 large scale catastrophe operations. And by the way, let me preface this, all of my experience is commercial. Okay, so I'm not looking at this from the residential. Most of mine or all of mine is really commercial jobs, hospitals, schools, government buildings, hotels, on and on and on and on. And so over the past 30 plus years, you can see the array of kinds of CAT operations that I've been on: tornadoes, earthquakes, regional flash floods, tropical storms, hurricanes is of course the most prevalent. Major freezes. In fact, the very first catastrophe I was involved in was in Dallas back in '89, I think it was. Major freeze, and then 3 terrorist attacks. And so these are just some of the kinds of operations that that I've been involved in over the years. So, all right, go ahead next. And so I'm not going to talk about each one of these, but first one back in 1989, that was a significant one, Hurricane Hugo in the Carolinas. And then in 1992, there were several. Many of you probably remember Hurricane Andrew, then the Midwest floods in 93. And go ahead next. I'm just kind of coming right on up through Northridge earthquake in 94, fire bombings, Hurricane Fran, Midwest freeze, major freeze event 1997. Okay, next, let's see, the Seattle earthquake, and this was an interesting one, that the majority of the damage that we worked with was at one place, was at Boeing's, their large facility there in Seattle, which Brendan, I know you're familiar with that area. And so Tropical Storm Allison, and this was an interesting one. This was never a hurricane. It was just a tropical storm that, as that depression came in over Houston, it just sat there and just kind of went round and round and round and round. And so it didn't cause a huge amount of structural destruction. It was just lots of water there.
By the way, Mickey, I got to say, I'd love to see a dehumidification plan for that Boeing building.
Yeah. Fortunately, it was one of these where it's this section over here and this section over here, et cetera. So, but then, of course, the September 11th terrorist attacks in New York and in the Pentagon. All right, go ahead. Baltimore Police Department. This was evidence recovery that we were doing there. Tornadoes in Nebraska. The 4 Florida hurricanes. This was probably many of you are beginning to remember these kind of these events, because now we're into 2004, mid 2000. But Charlie, Francis, Ivan, and Gene, they had Orlando dead in their crosshairs. And so about every 2 weeks, Charlie came across. We did a lot of work there, and then 2 weeks later, Francis, and then Ivan, and then Gene, and it was interesting that we did a lot of work at the Orlando airport. And after Charlie got through, we came across. We did a lot of drying, a lot of cleanup, and everything. And just about the time we were about to say, you know what, we're done, they said, uh-oh, here comes Francis. And they said, would you camp out in the basement and be ready to start extracting as soon as that occurs? And that's what we did. And so that was just a train. I can only imagine. Of hurricanes. So okay, next. All right, Hurricane Katrina and Rita, of course, we all remember that. New Orleans Superdome and the New Orleans Arena right next door to it. Then in 2008, more floods. 2009, Atlanta regional flooding here in Georgia, about 30 miles from where I'm sitting right now. And I took that picture, that bottom right picture. I'm 40 feet below grade. And this was one of the major, there was like 28, 29 buildings on this campus. It was the Orium Clayton sewage treatment plant, the largest sewage treatment plant in the Southeast. And it was just, it was, of course, category 3. And so this is a very high profile job for this entire area. and then the Groundhog Day blizzard in Illinois, and then a whole series. I'll finish with just most of these are ones that I was involved in from afar. Most of these were things where I was consulting on. So I had a lot of restorers who would call me and after Superstorm Sandy and Matthew, and I spent time back and forth over in Houston a lot after Harvey, then Michael and Laura, and they just never end. So these are some of the ones that I've had experience at over the years.
And I appreciate that, Mickey. I think as we get into some of the lessons that you wanted to talk through today, I think having kind of that background and context is going to be helpful for everybody. So based on that and based on that experience, first of all, the first thing I'll say is that every time I look at this with you and kind of get a feeling for how the last 30 years has been for you, it gives me a deeper respect for your sense of humor and your demeanor and just being able to get through that much. I know, the industry has taken a toll on a lot of us, but just the hard part, I think, and we talked about this right at the very beginning, is just being able to take that step back and look past kind of the disasters and the damage and the devastation that we see day in and day out, and then realize the impact that our work has had for so many lives, because of what we're doing in the restoration space. So with that, let's go ahead and let's get into some of these lessons learned. So let's take and distill from that experience over that 30 years, what key lessons can a contractor take away from that? And I want to start, you have this quote that you've used as you talk about this, and I love this quote. I've read it several times over the last several days. I absolutely love it because it speaks so much to the importance of learning and education and training in so many different ways. So we'll start with that.
And before you, let's see. All right, we'll go ahead and bring that up. This is a quote by the great playwright Oscar Wilde. And I'm sometimes asked, Brandon, well, get out there and get experience. Just go out there and get experience, because experience is, that's going to be your best teacher. Well, Oscar Wilde has this quote, and they said, experience is the hardest kind of teacher. It gives you the test first and then the lesson afterwards. Yep. So you go out, you got a lot of experience. You messed up a lot, you failed a lot of tests, and now you think about the lesson. So experience is the most expensive kind of teacher.
Yeah,
it is a good teacher, but it's an expensive teacher.
Well, and you said something a minute ago that I think is really important with this, is that experience is only a teacher if you embrace the lesson, right? I think a lot of us, we're aware of when we make a mistake. The challenge is a lot of us don't translate that mistake into lessons. I deal with this with my kids all the time, but translate that into a lesson and learn from it, right? And turn that into something that can be beneficial and avoid that mistake moving forward. So I think it's a great quote. It's a wonderful quote.
I think of another quote, Brandon, here a couple of years ago, Jason Statham had a movie called The Assassin? And he was training the character played by Jessica Alba. And he said, experience, good judgment comes from experience. And a lot of that comes from bad judgment.
That's a good way to put it. So
I think that one's a good one. So
let's take that and roll right into the meat of what we wanted to get at today with these lessons. As we do that, I want to give everybody a quick reminder, please, if you have questions as we go through this, drop them into the Q&A tool. As we round out today in about another 20 minutes here, we're going to go into a live Q&A session. And the easiest way not to forget those questions is to drop them into that Q&A tool. So drop those questions in. And with that, Mickey, let's roll over to lessons learned.
All right. Well, lesson number one, and this may seem obvious, but for a lot of people, it's not. And that is that every CAT is different. Every catastrophe operation is different. So there's some of the bullet points. So sometimes a catastrophe operation may be very slow developing. And I think of the Northridge earthquake. That one, we were a week down the road and we didn't have a job. And so other times they are quick developing. In fact, when we had that situation in LA with the Northridge earthquake, my one of my colleagues said, "Mickey, you know, if we don't hurry up and get a job out of this, we better start updating our resume." And so sometimes these things are slow developing, sometimes quick. Sometimes it's a localized event like Boeing, like a tornado. In many cases, the tornado kind of a catastrophe is fairly localized. 2 miles away, the restaurants are still operating. The hotels are still there. Or sometimes they're region wide. They affect the entire area. I think of Katrina. We were driving 3 hours one way to get hotels. Sometimes it's a dry event. A lot of tornadoes are dry events. Sometimes these catastrophe operations are wet events. Sometimes the infrastructure is completely compromised. Sometimes it's intact. Sometimes it's a single customer. Sometimes it's multiple, lots of different customers. So, I mean, so every cat has a little bit of different flavor to it and different challenges to them. So that's the first one. Next, business continuity. In 2007, the U.S. Congress passed the Gulf Coast Back to Business Act. And they did some studies. They did some research, and I'm not privy to the studies. I don't know exactly how they went about determining this, but they determined that 43% of businesses that close following a natural disaster never reopen. Now, when I first read that, that statistic just absolutely blew me away. That 43% of the businesses that close after a natural disaster never reopen. But of those that do reopen, 29% of them closed permanently within 2 years.
Wow.
So when we think of, and both of those statistics, Brandon, they just sort of blew me away. I thought, yeah. Goodness.
Especially cumulatively.
Yeah, exactly. So we know that if we're looking at Katrina, for example, you know, a lot of people left the Gulf Coast. And so Louisiana, South Louisiana basically shrunk by 35%. And a lot of those people never came back. So a lot of those people wound up in Illinois, Kansas, Texas, Georgia. They were gone. So here, in a lot of cases, the market is gone. Your customers, they're not even here anymore. And so you know, it's going to be very difficult, you know, building things back. So the priority with businesses is business continuity.
Well, and I would imagine that this is a risk factor also as a contractor that you've got to keep in mind.
Absolutely.
For the work that you do, and just the risk of a business being able to really be an entity to pay for the work that's being done.
You know, Brandon, a lot of times we think that price is everything. Okay, with a business, price is not number one. Continuity is number one. Keep me in business, keep me operating. So that's number one. Price may be second, it may be third, it may be fourth, but I guarantee price is not number one. Keep me in business somehow. Business continuity, that's really going to be the you know, the top of the mind. So
yeah, that makes total sense.
Yeah. Okay. Red flags. You know, if I could have a conversation here, I would ask people, and I'd think about this. We may come back and talk to it again. Have you ever gone into a job and from day one there was a red flag or two red flags? and you went ahead and did it. And then about 3 days into the job, you're kicking yourself because you didn't pay attention to that red flag.
Mhm.
So I find that, you know, a lot of the students that come to my class, they say, oh yeah, I had a red flag. And I said, did you do it? Yeah, we went ahead and did it. And boy, did we regret that. So risks may be evident from the very start, or it may become evident very, very early in a job. So what I tell people, don't walk away from a job, walk away from a customer.
Yeah.
Because oftentimes the problem is not, it's a difficult job. It's a job that's impossible. It's a job that is going to be go very long. Oftentimes it's going to be customers who are going to cause you, going to be the biggest red flags you have. So make sure that you do something about the red flags. And here's a couple of things that we learned to make a regular practice. Number one, do a Dun and Bradstreet. Pull a credit report on every first-time customer. So pull a credit report, and that's going to give you, you know, maybe raise some red flags. And then secondly, make sure that you understand lien laws in your area. So lien laws are different by state to state. And so make sure that you're willing to perfect the lien, make sure that you give lien notices, and make sure that you perfect those liens if you need to at the end of a job. And the laws are different. So red flags, you need to make sure that you secure your job and secure your payments.
Well, I would assume, Mickey, that, and I know this is a little off topic from this particular slide, but it's related. Just understanding that market that you intend to respond to and all of the associated laws and regulations for business and general contracting. And I think walking into an environment like that without a really hefty, previously performed assessment of how your business matches up against those local requirements is, I would assume, uber critical.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. All right, now, so be willing to perfect the lien. Now a lien is a heavy hammer. That is a heavy hammer that you have, and it is a tool that is very, very needed at times. But you need to understand the notices that you have to give in order to use that for payment and everything. So make sure you understand it. Okay, next.
Oh, sorry about that, Mickey. I clicked twice. There you go.
All right, take care of your people. Take care of your people. Please take care of your people. And I'm going to go through kind of three things here. Catastrophe operations are major disruptions to families, to homes, to milestones, to planned events. They get postponed. They're on that calendar. That's September the 2nd. That's my wife and I, that's our anniversary. And we've been married now for almost 56 years.
That's awesome.
And the first 5 years I was with the company. Now, by the way, September 2nd is the height of the storm season. You probably all know that. And the first 5 years I was with the company, I missed our anniversary because I was out on cat duty. And I went to my boss after it was over and I said, now, boss, if I missed the next one, I probably won't have to worry about anymore. And so, we chuckled on that, but I'll tell you what, it was a serious deal. The next September 2nd, I was home for that. And so go ahead and click the next one. Okay, the stresses include long hours, long drive times, inadequate lodging, meals, and you're going to be eating fast food and junk food, and you're going to be in possible unsafe conditions. And that fellow right there, that's a friend of mine. And let me tell you that bubble wrap does not make a good mattress. Okay. So these are stresses that can be really, really difficult. And go ahead to the next one.
Yeah,
Now,
hard to make commercial glue down carpet comfortable even with bubble wrap.
Boy, it really is. Yeah. Okay, this is what are some possible solutions? Well, you might have a preset duty time. Now, our practice, we said, okay, it's our policy that your duty is on for 21 days, and then we're going to get you out. We couldn't always do that. But that's what we tried to do, was we gave the expectation that you're going out for 21 days and then you're coming back. Now, one of the things that you don't want to do, if you have to change project manager in the middle of a job, I've seen job after job after job go south because after 14 days, that project manager had to come to the end of his 21 days. And we had to spell them, and then we changed project managers in the middle of the job. And oftentimes jobs go south at that time. So that's kind of difficult. So one of the things that we tried, and I can't tell you that it worked great, it helped, is that we said, okay, June, okay, these people, you're on team A. July, team B. August, team C, et cetera. So we tried to give them the expectation that when come July, you know that you're going to be the first one of the first people that's going to be going out. So just expect it. So we sort of tried to set that expectations. Another thing that we did, we did field visits. So we would bring the family out, the entire family oftentimes. Of the project manager. We'd bring their family out for a weekend. We would try to give them some time off. And so anyway, there's things that you can do, but taking care of your people is really a critical thing. Okay, next. Do postmortems. So I would encourage you to do a regular postmortem. That's what we called it. And so what we'd say, okay, we're going to put the cat to bed. And so you want to consider, what did we do well? So celebrate your successes, pat yourself on the back, but also you need to kick yourself in the butt. So what did we do well? What did we do not so well? And be open and honest and put everything on the table. Okay, everything is fair for us to talk about. All levels of the organization needs to be involved in this. So don't just get the managers together. Don't just get the salespeople together, because they're going to bitch and complain about everything. Okay, so you want to have frontline people. You want to have the back office personnel. You want to have managers, salespeople, operations people. You want to get not everybody together, but you want to get representatives from all levels of the organization together and begin to talk about what did we do well and what did we do not so well. And you need to prioritize those issues. And one of the things that is very quickly happens is that we start chasing the shiny objects. Now, what are shiny objects? Well, you know what? I heard about this company. They implemented this software program, and boy, it solved a lot of the. Okay, those are shiny objects. It's when we say, let's buy this. Let's buy this equipment. Let's implement this procedure. Let's buy this software package. If we only had these tools, boy, things would go better. In many cases, it's not the equipment and the tools and the documentation, it's the processes. Mm-hmm. It's the discipline of doing certain processes and putting those processes in place that is the solution, not some kind of an implemented, a new machine, a better machine. So narrow the list as you identify, because you're going to come up when you throw it out to the group and you say, what's our issues, you're going to come up with 15 issues or more. Okay, you're not going to come up with one or two. You're going to come up with, well, we need to do this, we need to do that, we need to give them training on this, we need to do this, you're going to come up with a dozen of them. Don't even think about trying to do those. You're probably not going to get more than 2 or 3 of them done. And so you want to narrow the list to a few, to the top 2 or 3 or 4. And you're going to assign a champion. You're going to set a plan, and then you're going to very slowly and deliberately work through those improvement items. John Cotter had wrote some great books. One of them is Leading, and now I lost the title, Leading Change, I think is what it was called. He also had a small book called Our Iceberg is Melting. And so it's a little, it's a great little book. It's only about like 50, 60 pages. And it's about the melting iceberg of the emperor penguins. And it talks about change leadership. I would encourage you to get, a book like that. So, but you've got to do postmortems. My boss always said, we've got to be hardest on ourselves. If we're not hard on ourselves, we will never improve. And most of the improvement things that we had to that you need to implement are processes, disciplines that you need to improve, not things that you need to buy. I can't tell you, as the training manager, I can't tell you how often it was that one of the regional managers or a salesperson or someone would come in and say, Mickey, we got to give these guys training. We got to give these people training. We got to train them to how to do this. And as the training manager, I also had the budget, and I don't mind putting training dollars out for training issues. But a lot of time, what we think is training issues are not training issues. It's some other kind of an issue. It's a discipline issue. It may be a supervisory issue. It may be a resource issue. It may be a very, very difficult process issue. They just can't, we've made it so difficult for them to complete this that they're throwing up their hands. And so make sure that if it's a training issue, be willing to put training dollars out, but it may not be a training issue.
Yeah, I think a really important point in that is that, kind of using the examples you use of equipment or, software or whatever else that it is, even those are only as effective as a commitment to the process that properly utilizes it, right? No piece of equipment is the process. It's a thing available for a process to be put into effect, right? But it isn't the process in and of itself. Even software, it's not the process, right? But it's the commitment of a process that utilizes that as a tool in that process, which all boils down to commitment from people to put the process into place.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think that brings us to the next one there, Brandon. Deal with the root cause, not the surface issues. Ask that one of the concepts in quality management and quality improvement is ask, why did it happen 5 times? So why did that happen? Okay, all right. Why did that happen? Why did that happen? Why did that happen? And when you ask 5 times, generally by that time you're down to the root cause, and now you can deal with something.
Yeah, I think this actually stems. A lot of my career was spent in manufacturing, and that was the first place I heard of the 5 whys principles in manufacturing. Right, it was a core principle in Kaizen is what they call it. And so I think it's pretty universal, right? You ask why, and you keep asking why until you can't ask why anymore, to really get to the root, because so many times as human beings, we tend to treat symptoms is the way that I've often heard it expressed. Instead of treating the actual core ailment, we treat a symptom, which is scary, right? Because if you treat the symptom effectively, then you may not be aware of the problem until it becomes a much bigger issue.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's a great point.
All right.
So,
Next.
So with that, I think that rolls us over to the end of the lessons. So what I want to do here, we have a lot of questions that have rolled in, and I'm going to start throwing those at you, Mickey. Especially, thank you, Robert, for throwing some really good ones in here. So we'll get to those in just a moment. Before we do, let me go ahead and close out just a couple of notes here for the next episode, et cetera, and just talk about what's upcoming next. So the next episode of Technically Speaking, which is coming up in July 18th, so it's just a few weeks out. I'm going to dig real deep into the technical, as Mickey and I talked about. We love the technical side, so I'm going to dig real deep into the technical of desiccant dehumidification. I like to say the only thing difficult about desiccants is spelling it, because everybody always spells it wrong. So I'm going to get real deep into that. We'll talk about the technology in desiccant dehumidification, kind of the strengths and weaknesses and misunderstandings. Also talk a lot about how to justify their use. I think a lot of times, a lot of people stray from the use of a desiccant, not because it's the right or wrong tool, it's just because they don't necessarily understand how to communicate why it's being used. So we'll get into that pretty deep on July 18th. So put that on your calendar. It'll be the same time, same place right here at Technically Speaking. And then kind of throughout the rest of the year, I've got a number of topics that I'm queuing up around wildfire restoration. That'll be likely going to come up in August. I've got a session that we're going to do on trauma and crime scene restoration. I've got an expert that I'm working on in the world of remediation. So we've got lots of great topics coming up. So watch your calendar, watch your emails, and we'll get to those as they come.